Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jim Kleiber Show. Took the mic off mute. Today is Wednesday, November 4th, 2020, and, well, we got past Election Day. We're still here. The sun is still shining. The air is warming up a little bit here in Michigan, and the election continues. People are done voting, and we are now just waiting for the final results. It's a close race, and who knows what will happen. I know there were many people with me last night staying up very late on the internet. There were quite a few people on Twitter chatting much later than I would say they, but I would say we probably should have been. I didn't get to sleep until very late. Yeah. The day came and went, has come and gone, and it's... Oh, this is going to be a first sneezing on air. Oh, fantastic. They normally followed by a second one, so we'll see if that second one comes anytime soon. But let me turn off my phone so I don't get any distractions. Yeah, I'm feeling a bit tired. I don't know how you're feeling. Are you feeling tired, exhausted, excited, hopeful, hopeless, angry, frustrated, confused, confident, grateful, joyful, proud, ashamed, embarrassed, regretful? What are you feeling? Lots of different things you could be feeling. And maybe you're feeling a lot of them. You know, after Trump won in 2016, I felt very regretful that I didn't try to work with the Clinton campaign and help them on their communication. And because I think Clinton could have done two things, at least two things, to really bring people back onto her team. One was to talk about the affair that she, or the affairs that Bill had on her and the impact on her, and how it was one of the hardest decisions of her life, I imagine, to choose whether to stay or go. To talk about that and really open up vulnerably. And then the second thing was to apologize for ignoring a large swath of the American population from which she came, the more rural voters, being the person who grew up in a, I believe, more rural area, and then she went off to kind of the East Coast. And I don't know. I think I felt a lot of regret for not trying to help her communicate that better. And this time, right now, I don't feel the regret for not helping the Biden campaign. I think there's a part of me that realizes there's only so much that can be done at the last minute to talk with people and appeal to people and convince people. And by last minute, I mean even in the year running up to the election. I think what I learned last night, or learned more deeply, is that so many of us are baffled that the other side would vote the way that they did. I can speak on behalf of me and many people I know. We are absolutely baffled and confused that people would vote for Donald Trump after 4 years of watching what he's done. Like, of the lies and the possible breaking of the law here and there and here and there, and the pandemic and the impeachment, and still vote for this guy. So I think, many of us on this side are baffled. But I think many people who voted for Trump are baffled that people would support Biden and think that Biden is not corrupt, or think that the country is not going to devolve into socialism or communism, or think that that the coronavirus is a big deal. It's just, what it says to me is that the country is really divided in a way, but really distant from each other. So many of us are so distant from each other. It shocks me sometimes when I'm like, this friend of mine supported Donald Trump? Really? That person? That person? Like, what? And it just says to me, I mean, even before the pandemic hit, that culturally or just relationship wise, we're becoming more and more distant from each other in some ways. Back in the day, we used to listen to common news channels or radio stations, but now there's just so many options that people listen to whatever they want to listen to. We can go so deep into what they call, those filter bubbles. We can get so lost in our own echo chambers that we assume the other person is seeing the same things we are. Like, how do they not believe this? Oh, maybe they're not even seeing it or hearing it. Or if they see or hear it, they don't believe it because they think the person who's saying it is lying to them all the time. Easy for me to say that about people who supported, who voted for Trump. But I can imagine they have a very similar perspective for someone like me, being like, oh, but like, because, I don't trust many of the things that Sean Hannity says. I don't trust many of the things that are coming out of certain uh, Twitter figures that support Trump. And many of them are like, well, how do you not believe this? Like, didn't you hear how this happened and this happened? Like, no, I didn't hear that. What are you talking about? You didn't. And that's if we even talk to each other and even have the conversation of, oh, you didn't hear about it. I think it's so easy for us, almost all of us, to assume that the other person sees and experiences what we do. And in the same way, I was talking with my dad last night about this. It's just that I think because I've traveled and I've lived in so many different places that, and because of my nature of I like going out and meeting people from lots of different backgrounds, I have met people from so many different backgrounds. And it's very hard for me to remember sometimes that most people haven't. Most people don't have friends from like a majority of the states in the US and from a majority of the ethnic backgrounds in the US and from probably a majority of the economic classes in the US and from multiple countries around the world. Most people haven't. And I'm not saying that this makes me better in any way. It just makes my experience different to what a lot of other people experience. And I can forget that so easily. Of course, like, how do you not understand what it might be like to, be a black person going down the street and have a police officer come up to you and just like the sheer terror you might feel? Well, if people don't have close friends who are Black Americans, they may not get it. And I don't necessarily get it, but I've heard stories from friends, and I've not just the stories, but I've like seen the emotions, the terror, the pain when they describe some of these stories. And these are people I care about. And so it hits me harder maybe than somebody who hasn't had conversations like that or hasn't had relationships with people like that. Yeah. And so for someone, just say, for example, somebody in the South, and there's maybe there's more immigrants coming in from Mexico or other parts of Latin America. And now these immigrants are setting up their own stores, own restaurants, and a lot of times speaking Spanish in these places. For somebody who has never had a friend or a relationship with someone who's a native Spanish speaker, that could be terrifying in some ways, right? Are they talking about me? I mean, this is something I went through when I first was learning foreign languages, or when I lived in Costa Rica. So like living in a foreign country, being like, what are they saying? Are they talking about me? I'm not sure what they're saying. Oh gosh, I feel kind of uncomfortable. But as I got more comfortable with the language, as I learned more languages and interacted with more people who spoke other languages, I realized, no, they're not talking about me. Almost always. And if they are, you can kind of tell from the body language how they look at you and some of these. But even then, I'd say the vast majority of time people aren't talking about me. But that comes from the experience I've had interacting with people like that. Whereas a lot of people haven't had those experiences. And it's not their fault. And it doesn't make them a good or a bad person. It just makes it different. I haven't had the experience of like going to a religious service very often. So for me, going into a religious service, it could really make me nervous and worried that I'm going to do something wrong, that I'm not going to abide by the rules. But for somebody who's been going to Catholic Mass their whole life, they just assume other people know it. I would imagine. I imagine many of them just assume that other people know the norms and the behaviors of what one is supposed to do in the Catholic Church. Whereas me, I have no idea. And so I can just imagine, or it's somebody who is, say somebody who's not being affected by the pandemic in terms of medical situation. Like they don't know anyone who's died from coronavirus. They don't know anyone who got the coronavirus. All they see is that their businesses are closing, they're losing their job, and they're afraid they're going to lose their house. It's just economic ruin that they see coming or are experiencing right now. I can imagine for that person, it might be hard to realize that other people aren't going through that right now because they may be stuck in this huge economic strife and think that so many people around the country are really struggling with that, but maybe not. And maybe some people don't even realize the depth of that struggle. Some people in this pandemic kept their jobs, arguably even made more money, and got to work from home. If they wanted to work from home, they're excited. So maybe they're saving on their commute. They're saving on food that they buy when they're out. And they're also saving more money, making more money. So it just seems that, this is the nature of how many billions of humans do we have on the planet. Everyone's going to be going through something slightly differently. Very much the same in many ways, but very different. And I think we're becoming more and more distant from those experiences with others. We're not having as much in common. Yeah. So when I think about what happened politically last night, admittedly, I was sad. I thought there was going to be a strong standing up against the moral behavior of Trump, a repudiation, as Van Jones said last night on CNN, this repudiation of his way of governing this country. But it wasn't the case. The country is nearly split 50-50. And I don't think we resolve these conflicts at the ballot box. I think we resolve these conflicts one-on-one. Start having more relationships and more connections with the people around us. Our neighbors who may come from a different background. Our friends who may have a different political belief. Our co-workers who come from a different economic class. Many other things. And just meeting with these people and talking with them and really trying to show them who we are and hear who they are. Because I read so much on Twitter, people, I can't believe all these people voted for Trump. They're racist. I can't believe they would vote for a racist. They're not voting for him because he's racist. I imagine most of them are probably voting because of economic reasons or because of fears or because of other things. I don't think their top of mind thing is racism. And that's why they're voting for him. Just as the same reason a lot of people aren't voting for Joe Biden because they want communism. They don't. I imagine very few people who voted for Biden want actual through and through communism implemented in the United States. From my understanding, most people in the U.S., most of us are pretty focused on capitalism. We may not like its current implementation, but I don't know how many people actually want to throw the whole thing out. I think many people voted for Biden because they're tired of having the president just whine on television all the time. I don't know. But another thing I took away from last night is that politics is almost an end result of what's going on in society. Same thing with the laws. Maybe laws are a good example. Laws are things that we write down because people aren't following the norms and the unwritten rules on how to interact with each other. If everyone on the highway would drive approximately 70 miles an hour, we don't need a speed limit if everyone is being careful with how fast they're going. But once people start driving recklessly and breaking that kind of shared agreement that we're only going to go a certain speed, then we put laws in place saying that the limit is 70 miles per hour. You can't go above that, and if you go above that, these are the penalties and consequences for it. So arguably a very conservative way of wanting less law, if we want less law, we have to have more closer relationships and more shared understanding and better agreements, informal agreements with each other, so that we don't have to formalize them so much. It even applies to business, right? If you think about doing a project for a client, and sometimes the project can be done with just a handshake, but that requires a lot of trust because the person may not do it, and it requires a lot of shared understanding because the person may not do it exactly how you wanted them to do it. And so when that trust starts breaking down more and more, we start instituting more formalized written contracts to say, you will do this and this and this and this, and if you don't, here are the consequences. Again, a lot of times those are not necessary when there's a strong, trusting relationship between the two parties and people understand each other quite well and understand what each other wants quite well. Yeah, so maybe by focusing so much on politics, we're actually focusing on the end of it and not the beginning. We're focusing on the end symptom. The symptom of Trump winning or Biden winning is not related to the root cause of what's going on. Thinking about with regards to Trump, there are many people who believe in this QAnon conspiracy theory these days. Okay, what's the root cause of that? How did people get to that point that they're believing in this? How much of it has to do with losing their job or losing hope or losing community or losing purpose in life or losing a feeling of strength and power or losing trust and authority or losing some other thing? How do we focus on this? Can politics focus on this, or is this something that culture focuses on, that other institutions or other organizations or groups of people focus on in kind of early stage before it reaches kind of the end stage, which is politics? I don't know. It seems that way in some ways politics and law is the last step in conflict resolution, or not last. I would say war is, but it's a further escalation of conflict that, when we can't resolve it, we keep going until we hit like law. That's kind of one of the last steps, especially in the court of law. If you think about law in that way, when two parties cannot resolve conflict, it often goes to the court of law. First, you try to resolve it locally. If it doesn't work, then maybe you escalate it. And if it doesn't work, maybe you call the cops. And if it doesn't work, then you escalate it and goes into the courts. And yeah, what it says to me is that the more that we're using the law, the more that we're focusing on politics, the more that we're focusing on a lot of the written rules on how to interact with each other, the less we're focusing on how to resolve the conflict beforehand, when it's still kind of in its informal, nebulous stage, when it's still very localized. I'm all for local government. People would look at me and say, oh, you're more globalist, you care about that. Listen, if local government and local individuals, screw government. If two individuals or two parties at the very, very local level, one person and one person, can resolve a conflict, fantastic. It is much more efficient for society if we can resolve conflicts at that level. Much more efficient. Oh my gosh. It takes time and money and a lot of energy to work something up, the conflict escalation, right? To bring in the cops, to bring in third party mediators, to go through the courts, it takes a lot of time, and can escalate the distance between the parties. Once you bring in the cops, now it's like, okay, that's an escalation. Oh, okay, I'm not going to resolve with you. I'm going to bring in this authority figure to settle it. And the parties can drift further and further apart, which I think we have. If I look at this election and I see that Trump is saying, oh, we're going to take this to the courts, we're going to take it all the way to the Supreme Court. It's like, do you not have the ability to resolve the conflict yourself? Do you have to take it to the courts every single time? Like, it's like, isn't that kind of like calling the teacher every time you get into a fight with a kid? Well, I want to call the teacher to say who won the fight or who is it the wrong. Why don't you just resolve it yourself? I don't know. It frustrates me that so often our response is becoming to call in the cops or to call in the authority or to call in the courts to try to resolve conflict that we can't resolve ourselves. So I guess I just care much more about us having the ability to resolve conflict before we get politics actually involved. Would we be in this situation? Would our country be so divided or feel so divided if people could resolve, if we, I can say people because I'm part of this, if we could resolve conflicts in our own families, if we didn't have so much estrangement in our families, in our romantic relationships and business relationships, wow, how would this country look different if we could resolve some of these conflicts and come back together? Not hoping that a presidential candidate or a senatorial race will bring the country back together. We have to bring the country back together. We have to bring our families back together. We have to bring our friends back together. How many of us hold grudges against people for what they did to us 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago? How many of us don't talk to people anymore because of what they said to us before they didn't say? How many of us just so angry and so disgusted by some of the people in our lives and just sit and wait for them to apologize and don't do anything ourselves? We just sit and wait for them to apologize, wait for them to repair the relationship instead of stepping up and repairing the relationship ourselves, instead of taking the lead, going first. I think it's just sitting here waiting for politics to resolve the conflicts that we have in our daily lives will leave so many of us miserable, because politicians aren't going to resolve this. We can resolve this if we want to. And we have to step up and lead. If we sit here and wait for someone else to resolve it for us, they're going to be sitting there and waiting for us to resolve it for them. It's this cat and mouse game of just sitting around. I don't know if that's the right expression. Of just sitting around waiting for the other person to start. And so rarely happens. So rarely happens. And so I think many of us are frustrated by what's going on politically. But I think really we're frustrated with what's going on in our lives. And we're not taking responsibility for it. I hate that phrase, actually. We're not doing something about it. I don't like taking responsibility. It seems more like an obligation. It's a choice. You can do something or you don't have to do something. But when we do things, we can resolve conflicts ourselves without bringing in third parties, without hoping that some magical person on the other side of the country will make a statement that resolves all the problems that we have in our lives. It's not going to happen. If we want to have better relationships in our lives, we have to start working towards that. If we want to have a more united country, we got to start working towards that at a local level. If we want to feel better, if we want to feel more hopeful and joyful and grateful and connected and supported, then we got to start doing it. No law is going to make that happen. Politics, especially in a democratic society, I believe is the result of culture, is the result of human relationships and how we interact with each other. And when we get to a point where the country is split almost 50-50 and both sides seem to have no idea, seem to be completely confused that the other side would vote in that direction, it says to me that we have a lot of work that we can do to bring each other back into each other's lives. So, yeah, in a way, I'm grateful for this election because it's helped me realize that I don't care so much about politics. I care about human relationships, and politics is just one outcome or symptom of it. And I care much more about how we interact with each other. I don't really care what your political identity is or your political affiliation or your political beliefs. I care about who you are, how you're feeling, more than anything. And if we can get back to that place where we start caring about each other's hearts and seeing each other's hearts, and more importantly, showing our hearts and showing what we're feeling and struggling with, and even excited about in our dreams, then I think this country will start to get back together. And then maybe we'll vote in a way where it looks as if we're together. But if we don't start doing it on a personal level, I don't think it's going to happen on a political level. So, grateful for you all to join in. And this talk felt good. And by good, I mean I feel a bit stronger. I feel more relieved. I feel confident. I noticed I was looking in the camera more, looking up here, not looking down at the screen. And so let's do this. Let's start getting back together on a personal level. Pay less attention to politics, more attention to people. All right, y'all. Speaking of which, I'm going to go help the family clean out the garage. Take care, y'all.